Hello, everyone.
Greetings. We're in the middle of the flood account, Genesis 7, verse 17. We'll read from both the NIV and the ESV.
For 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and as the waters increased, they lifted the ark high above the earth. The waters rose and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. They rose greatly on the earth, and all the high mountains under the entire heavens were covered. The waters rose and covered the mountains to a depth of more than 20 feet. Every living thing that moved on the earth perished, birds, livestock, wild animals, and all the creatures that swam over, that swarm over the earth, and all mankind. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils died. Every living thing on the face of the earth was wiped out, men and animals, and the creatures that moved along the ground and the birds of the air were wiped from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those with him in the ark. The waters flood the earth for 150 days.
But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. And the fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed. The rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days the waters had abated. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. I know Wenham makes a point of the use of the word remembered here, because the quaint language of Genesis and other early parts of the Bible could mislead you if you get the wrong impression. So God remembered Noah here could, in its simple way, connote the wrong thing, namely that God had to be reminded
that he could forget.
That he could forget, indeed. So Wenham meditates upon the use of remember in the rest of the Torah.
God remembered Noah. Similarly, God remembered Abraham after the destruction of Sodom. He remembered Rachel, and he remembered his covenant made in chapter 9, verses 15 and 16, etc. Man is bidden not simply to remember the past, but the future. And then he gives references to Isaiah 47:7 and Ecclesiastes 11:8, which suggests that the word is more equivalent to think about than to a concept of recall.
So not only think about, but also care about. So that the force that it has in the rest of the Old Testament when God says that we have to remember and that Israel should remember is that you must set your mind upon. These are the things that should be your priorities. Care about. Love the most, perhaps. And the account goes on. I do think of what Griffith Thomas said about this that you might not think about. All that you have here is a vessel that's shaped like a giant coffin, and it has, as far as we can tell, no mast and no sail and no rudder. All you have in the way of navigation is God himself. And if that's not faith, the entire future of the human race now rests upon one man and his family in a primitive vessel, in the worst catastrophe that's ever hit the earth. But all of it, of course, is in the hands of the Creator, whose purpose all of this is serving. It goes on, at the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters have subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth, Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more.
By the first day of the first month of Noah's 601st year, the water had dried up from the earth. Noah then removed the covering from the ark and saw that the surface of the ground was dry. By the 27th day of the second month, the earth was completely dry. Then God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful and increase in number upon it." So Noah came out, together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives. All the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground and all the birds, everything that moves on the earth, came out of the ark, one kind after another. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and the clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it.
Well, many who don't believe in even the literal or even the spiritual value of this account credit the account itself to derivation from Babylonian or Sumerian original myths.
Yeah. I had a little note on Gilgamesh saying that the similarities were 5 different things he's got as similarities. Divinely instigated, hero informed and delivered, that there was a boat, that the duration is given, and that a worship sacrifice is
blood
provided.
Sacrifice, yeah.
That those are the similarities to the account.
Now, those similarities have been noticed for a long time by archaeologists and, of course, Old Testament commentators. Mm-hmm. This is the second book of Alexander Heidel that's got great currency in the last 2 or 3 generations. We've referenced the other one, the Babylonian Genesis, in our videos on chapter 1 of Genesis. This is the Gilgamesh epic and Old Testament parallels, in which Heidel draws comparisons between the two, and he sees not just the similarities but the contrasts. And here's how he summarizes the contrasts at the end of the book. The main Babylonian flood legend in particular is steeped in the silliest polytheism, to quote the words of Dillman, the great Old Testament scholar. The gods are divided in their council, false to one another and to man. They flee in consternation to the highest heaven and cower like dogs in their distress. They quarrel and lie and gather over the sacrificer like a swarm of hungry flies. In the Babylonian accounts, the moral and ethical motive is almost completely absent. As we read the first few lines of the flood story on table 11 of the Gilgamesh epic, we get the impression that the cataclysm was caused by the caprice of the gods for no ethical reason at all. However, toward the end of the story, we are told, quite incidentally and by implication only, that the flood was due to the sin of mankind. Wherein the sin consisted is not indicated. According to the Atrahasis epic, the flood was sent because mankind, with their noisy, hilarious gatherings, disturbed the sleep of Enlil, the supreme god. Some such idea may also have been in the minds of the authors of the flood tradition in the Gilgamesh epic. In none of the other Babylonian legends do we find any reason at all for the deluge, an omission which may, however, be due solely to the imperfect state in which they have come down to us. At any rate, in the Babylonian stories, it is nowhere emphasized that the gods were actuated by moral ideals or that the flood was a divine visitation on human corruption. Rather, considering that the gods were intent on destroying the whole human race without discrimination between the just and the unjust, it is apparent that the gods were prompted more by caprice than by a sense of justice.
So I think, too, a big difference is that's gods. In the other stories, it's one god.
Yeah.
In this story, and he's distinguished from the people. He's not behaving the same way as as man. Yeah.
So the moral element of the entire human race being corrupted by this time, and as we said in one of the last videos, that God only destroys us when we've already destroyed ourselves. Wenham, I know, has a summary of the lesson of the chapter too.
Throughout the flood story, then, Genesis paints a completely different portrait of God from the standard ancient theology. Most obviously, there is only one God. This means that all powers belong to Him. It is not shared out unequally among different members of a pantheon. But just as important is the character of the divinity revealed by the flood story. He is still personal. Anthropomorphic language is freely used to describe God's thoughts and attitudes. But the failings that too often characterize humanity and the Babylonian deities are eliminated. God is not fearful, ignorant, greedy, or jealous. He is not annoyed by man's rowdiness, but by his depravity.
Yeah, so those who have most closely studied the narratives of the flood legends right across the planet, not just the Babylonian Sumerian myths, realize there's a gulf of difference, and this is what Heidel in the first book, the Babylonian Genesis, concentrates on. It's not just here in the flood story, it's in all the stories.
A soberness in the Old Testament that's not there in the
moral sobriety.
Stories. Yeah.
That's right, but also simplicity. The others tend to get very messed up in small details which don't seem to make a lot of difference to us, but maybe had relevance in ancient times to the peoples who told the stories over the centuries. We got to put a link into Bernard Ram's discussion of superficial Bible study, is it?
Yes, and
it's
ecclesiastical cultism.
I think it was eschatological.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Eschatological cultism. So Bernard Ram, who was a very fine theologian of the last generation, wrote many fine books, and his book on the Christian view of science and scripture is the one that we highlight in that video.
And the playlist.
We'll put in the Genesis playlist.
Yeah.